Hello, and welcome to another of the Nautical Institute's webinars, technical webinars. So I am David Petraco. I'm in London with the headquarters of the Nautical Institute. And we are very pleased to be joined by Captain Paul Drouin from his home in Quebec. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. Bonjour.
Great to have you. Thanks. Before we get started on the webinar itself, just a few housekeeping possibilities here. Okay, so you will find that you have a control panel. That control panel can be expanded or contracted using that little white arrow in the orange field. Once it is open, you have the option of submitting a written question. Feel free at any time during the presentation to submit that, and I will take as many as I can afterwards and address them to Paul, and we'll have a little bit of a chat. So the seminar will run, or the webinar will run for about an hour, half an hour or so on a presentation given by Paul, and then another half an hour of Q&A between Paul and myself. So, but like I said, at any time during the presentation or the Q&A, feel free to write a question, but try to keep it short and succinct, otherwise you confuse me. You also will note that there are 3 handouts. Feel free to download those and use them as you wish. Right, so being as slick as possible. Oh, one more thing. Okay, no, we're not going to do that. After the webinar, you will have a little pop-up quiz that helps us improve these webinars. So if you don't mind taking just a couple minutes to fill that out. And in a couple hours afterwards, you will get a little message saying thank you for attending, and there will be a link to a CPD attendance certificate. So you're welcome to that. It will have your name on it. Now we're going to talk about MARS, the Marine Accident Reporting Scheme. It is made possible by companies who sponsor us. They're called Nautical affiliates, and you'll see some of their logos there. So we really take a full heartfelt thank you to all of those companies, and you cast around. Hopefully some of you will recognize your own logos there, so thank you very much. Here's some more. Again, these are great companies. Nautical affiliate can start as little as £500, and it supports Mars, and you'll find out why that's so important when Paul starts giving his presentation. And you also get a little Nautical affiliate special logo that you could use for your own company purposes. Okay, so let me introduce Paul, and I'll try to be slick and transfer presentation over to Paul now. Okay, Captain Drouin started his career with the Canadian Coast Guard. He did roughly 20 years with the Coast Guard, followed by about 10 years with the TSB, the Transportation Safety Board, doing accident investigations. After that, he's now, for the last 7 years, while he's been the editor of Mars, he has also been a sailing master on various ships around the world. So he is absolutely the right man for this job, given his experience as both an accident investigator and a current mariner. So feel free to ask him anything. Captain Drouin, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. You're very kind. You're very kind. And yes, of course, questions. I'll do my best at the end of this presentation to answer questions. Of course, we may not have the answers, but I think that amongst all of us, we will arrive at some interesting answers. So here we go. I mean, it's been my pleasure to be the Mars editor for the last 7 years now. 2013 I started, and basically we're using reports coming in from private individuals, companies, and also, of course, published reports from administrations like the MAIB or the Transportation Safety Board of Canada or the NTSB, in the United States. We're condensing those reports. So many of those reports would be 50 or 100 pages, and my job would be to condense that report into 3 paragraphs. Not always easy, but what we want to do is condense it and have hammer out a message that's easy to understand, and can be basically in 4 pages in every Seaways edition every month. The middle section is 4 pages long of Mars reports. So those reports are the condensation of many reports. So let me see here. Let's get this slideshow underway. What we have in Mars, I mean, MARS, the Mariners Alerting and Reporting Scheme. It's been on the go for the last 28 years, and the key words in there are alerting and reporting. Those are important concepts. I mean, without alerting and reporting, you're not going to get continuous improvement. You're not going to learn the lessons that you have to learn, and unfortunately, you're probably going to make the same mistakes again. And that's what we try to short circuit with continuous improvement. And that's what alerting and reporting will, at the end of the day, help achieve. So with the reports within your company, but also in accident reporting schemes like the MAIB or the Transportation Safety Board, or for that matter, Mars, the more reports that you're able to read or learn of, the better your risk appreciation will be sharpened. At least that's my opinion. So instead of just learning from your own accidents and incidents, you're going to be learning from everybody else's, which is key. Now, we do have all of the Mars reports are on a database on the Nautical Institute website, and you can search. It's free. You don't have to be a member of the Nautical Institute to profit from those reports. You just have to go on the Nautical Institute website, search for the Mars button, and then you can do a search using keywords, or you can search by dates, by years. If you have an inkling of what year it happened, or if you wanted to know all the accidents that were in Mars in 2015, for example. So there's a picture of Seaways magazine. I hope many of you are members of the Nautical Institute, because if you are, you will be getting a copy of Seaways every month. And not only is Mars the insert of the middle insert of Seaways, but I mean, there are extremely interesting articles in Seaways every month. So that's one of the big advantages of becoming a member of the Nautical Institute. You get your Seaways every month. And there's a little facsimile of what the Mars reports look like in the middle of Seaways, the 4 pages in the middle of Seaways. So let's talk to the Mars database that I just mentioned. Exactly as I had mentioned earlier, what the more reports you read, beat Mars or otherwise, the sharper your risk awareness should become. Now, you can use, for example, as well, these Mars reports could be used as a nucleus for safety meetings. I mean, in essence, you should be giving your crews should be giving safety meetings at least once a month, but hopefully more frequent than that. And sometimes you're looking for inspiration. Sometimes there's not enough going on the boat, on the ship, for the officers to come up with an interesting topic. So the Mars database could serve as some sort of inspiration for safety meetings. What else do we have here? Well, there's over 2,000 reports presently on the database. So of course you could do searches on the investigative agencies' websites, like the MAIB or TSB or what have you. And the reports, they're on the web as well. But the Mars reports being much more condensed, it would be an easier task to find by keyword or type of accident. So we've done a few tests, so the keyword searches are not perfect, but they're not too bad. They're not too bad. I mean, sometimes you get a little bit of a quirky result. You just have to persevere, try some keywords, different keywords for the different accidents you're trying to shake out of the database, basically. So here we go. You can find that database on the Nautical Institute website. Go to the Mars button, and then you'll see this other further clickable button. I'd like to draw your attention as well. Just below that is submit a report, which is very important. I mean, this is I'm going to be shamelessly flogging sending in reports during this talk, because we do get reports from private individuals, private companies, but we can always use more, of course. So if you're a captain, a chief mate, chief engineer, who knows, a superintendent, anybody, even a seaman can submit reports. You click on submit a report, and you'll get a pro forma form to fill out. And you can just tell us what happened. And of course, it's confidential. All reports sent to myself or David into the Nautical Institute are absolutely confidential, but it's not anonymous. You have to tell us who you are, and there's a reason for that. I mean, well, first of all, confidential, because we don't want to point the finger. So if a report is used in Mars, we will endeavor to take out all company names, any pictures that you send. We will Photoshop them so that the name of the company, or if it appears on the funnel or on the ship, even the ship's name will not be seen. And even when we do, for example, a chart where the vessel is aground or what have you, we try to make that chart indistinguishable, in the sense that we don't want geographically the readers to know where it's happening. I mean, it could happen, and that's not the end of the world. But at the same time, you know, we do endeavor to make even the geographic location unknown. So why is it confidential? Because we need to know. We may need to get back to you. Why is it not anonymous? Is we may need to get back to you. There may be questions. It's rare, but I do have to get back sometimes to a submitter to ask them questions about a certain point in the report, just to clarify. So that's why it's not anonymous. But the confidentiality is strict, and we will we will do all efforts to make the report confidential. And we basically don't want to point the finger. We're not trying to find guilty parties. We're just trying to show the readers what happened, why it happened, and to learn the lessons. It's basically the lessons learned, which is what we're trying to shake out of each Mars report. So here we have the Performa report is available, and that's up on the site, as I mentioned. But you don't have to use that Performa report. You can send in any format. So if you're using a word processor, you can send that in with any basically a PDF format or Microsoft format. What's critically important also, if possible, are pictures, because pictures are 1,000 words. Each picture is worth 1,000 words. And it helps so much for the readers to read the paragraph or 2 paragraphs or 3, but also to see what's happening, see the picture, see what happened, or the consequences of the accident. So that's critical. If pictures are available, to send the pictures along with your report. And I've gotten questions over the years about what is this accomplishing? You know, why are we publishing reports of accidents? And it seems to go on every month. There's 4 pages of accidents. There's 5, 6, or 7 Mars reports in every Seaways magazine every month. And I've had a few readers write in and say, you know, why are you doing this? Well, it's coming to the same thing. It's the same accidents seem to be occurring and repeating. And they're right. But we're documenting, it's very important to document these accidents and to shake out the lessons learned of each accident and to keep publishing them, because as we've mentioned earlier, the more accident reports are out there, the more they're available, the more you read each individual person, be it the seaman all the way up to the captain, to the superintendent, and even more importantly, I'd say shipping management personnel. If they read these reports, they will sharpen their risk appreciation, and they will come to the realization, like I have, and like many safety professionals have, that although almost all accidents are preventable, they seem to keep happening again and again, but there are reasons for that. And we'll get into that in a minute. But the good companies, the ones that have a sharp risk appreciation, the ones that have that all the way up to top management, are having many less accidents than other companies. Another question we get a lot are, you know, what's the difference between an accident, an incident, or a close call? I mean, it sort of goes without saying, but other times not so much. And obviously, an accident is a more major. There's been consequences, measurable consequences, and people may be deceased or seriously injured. That would be qualified as an accident. Incident, not so much. Maybe the consequences are not as bad. Obviously, no fatalities in an incident normally. A fender bender, as we would say. And the close call, well, nothing happened. Basically, it was almost an accident or almost an incident, but there was zero consequences. But the difference between a close call and an accident or an incident is basically just good luck or bad luck, either way you see it. It's just a matter of luck. So a close call is basically an accident, but with luck involved, you just didn't have any bad consequences. So that's why every accident, incident, or even close call must be investigated and drilled down and to determine basically the unsafe conditions that were involved. Because there's always, at the end of the day, there's always going to be an unsafe condition or more than one unsafe condition. There may be some unsafe acts, but unsafe acts in and of themselves are not a cause of an accident, an incident, or a close call. There's going to be, underneath that unsafe act, there's going to be an unsafe condition. So that's what you want to get to. So that's why you should investigate even a close call, and the reporting of those of the accidents and incidents and even close calls. I mean, normally any company that's a self-respecting company is going to want to know about any accident, incident, or even a close call, and that should be reported up to management. But of course, that shouldn't stop you from reporting it to Mars as well, or your national authority. It depends on your national authority's legislation. Each country is a little bit different. Each country defines an accident or an incident differently, and they also the requirements for reporting to the national authority are slightly different. So you have to, depending on what your flag state is, do some research. Go see what the requirements of your flag state vessels are for reporting accidents and incidents. In my 11 years with the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, we were getting a lot of reports in. Most of them were close calls or incidents. The odd accident, and even the accidents, we wouldn't investigate necessarily all of the accidents. We would take the information from the company and enter it into the database. But of course, if it was an important accident, then we would deploy to the vessel. Usually 2 investigators would deploy to the vessel and spend anywhere between 8 and 12 hours on the vessel, sometimes more, but it was generally between 8 and 12 hours and gathering information, doing interviews, and then producing many months later the formal report. But it's a process. Those formal reports from national authorities are involved, and it's a process, and they go through many levels of vetting. So that's why it takes a fair amount of time. But in company practice, I mean, an accident investigation would probably take a couple of hours, and the report can be done the next day and sent up. So it's there is really no excuse for not reporting. Another issue that I'm trying to push in Mars, and we see it over and over again for old accidents, is running what we call running risk assessments. When you come on board a ship, a new ship, you have new eyes, and you'll see hazards that the old shipmates, they've been on for a month, 2 months, 6 months, they just haven't seen these hazards. And by coming on board, either as a crew or if you're a contractor or what have you, the hazards will tend to jump out at you, and you'll see them. And you may ask, why is this like this? And the crew members will look at you funny and say, well, I don't know, or it's always been like that, or something to that nature. So running risk assessments and bringing your new eyes onto the vessel are critical. And I think one way that companies could increase their risk appreciation is to ask all new on-signing crew members, for example, all new on-signers to take 24 hours, 48 hours as they come on, to go about the vessel with their new eyes, and to report any hazards that they may see, because you've been on, the old crew's been on, they haven't seen those hazards. They're just floating around there in front of them, but they just haven't realized that hazard is there. So new crew members coming on board, ask them to do the ship tour and basically look for hazards and report. So I'm going to give just a quick rundown on a simplified investigation technique. From my experience, I mean, there are different techniques. There are different applications now for risk analysis and for investigation, which basically at the end of the day comes down to the same thing, that is identifying the unsafe condition or conditions. Usually there's more than one unsafe condition. So you want to get to the bottom of any accident, incident, or close call, and that's to find the unsafe conditions. But what it comes down to, regardless of the way you're going to go about it, is what we call the 5 whys. I mean, you may have to ask why 5 times. I mean, the first why, the accident happened, why? The answer to that first why is probably not the one you want to get to. That's not the unsafe condition. And you may have to ask several times, going down. Each time you ask why, you're going one level deeper into getting down to the unsafe condition. You may go through a few unsafe acts, as I mentioned earlier, but again, you should never stop at an unsafe act. There is an unsafe condition, or many unsafe conditions, that have caused the person to decide to act unsafely. So you've got to get to those unsafe conditions in order to learn the lessons, basically, and stop the accidents from happening again. So how it all connects. In Mars, we don't want to identify guilty parties, obviously. It's a matter of continuous improvement. So continuous improvement is a very important concept, and it is a key concept in a safety culture of any company, of any program. And without continuous improvement, which is lessons learned, basically. Without continuous improvement, you cannot have a strong, a robust safety culture. So you have to identify the unsafe conditions and apply the administrative barriers, or ideally, you want to eliminate the unsafe condition, if that's possible. You want to eliminate totally the unsafe condition that you found, or conditions that you found that have been identified as contributing to the accident or incident. Now, if you can't eliminate the unsafe condition, then you can certainly put up either a physical barrier or an administrative one. And by administrative barrier, we're talking about procedures. But again, procedures are great, and every company, self-respecting company now has procedures on board the ship for all risks. That's the key. So, but procedures do not give you permission to disengage your brain at the same time. I mean, all things being equal, you have to go about your work with new eyes. You have to be on on the button for identifying hazards, but you have to follow procedures as well. And many accidents happen because procedures are being short-circuited or not followed. I mean, let's face it, that's a huge contributing factor. But again, even when procedures are being followed, different things can happen, and that's where you have to have your, you have to be on the button and able to react at any time to stop the work if something is happening, some unsafe condition has creeped up. Even if you're following the procedure, work can be stopped and should be stopped if any worker identifies something that's not safe. I mean, accident investigation is a science. I mean, it's there are techniques to accident investigation, and for that matter, the Nautical Institute has some short courses available. I think David will speak to that. I think they're 3 days. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, David will answer that after the presentation. Other institutions have courses. I mean, Lloyd's Maritime Academy has a diploma course that takes over a year, and it's full disclosure. I work with Lloyd's Maritime on that course. It lasts a year because every month they open a new module, and there's a lot of reading involved. But there are ways to sharpen your accident investigation technique, and private companies as well. I've given myself seminars that last about 3 days for accident investigation. So it's it's possible to sharpen your investigative techniques. It's not necessarily evident how to conduct proper interviews and what have you. So these things, like anything, need to be honed up and worked on. And that's it. That is the presentation about Mars and Mars reporting. I will give control, or David will take control back. There we go. I can see.
Well, you can see again. That's good. Paul, thanks so much. That was a fantastic presentation. And I mean, it just goes to show why we started Mars nearly 30 years ago. And it was a platform for mariners to share incidents with other mariners through dialogue. It's not a database as such. It's sharing of information for learning. And that's the thing. And you made that very clear. People, often learn from their own mistakes, but it's so much better to learn from somebody else's and not to make those mistakes yourself. So the questions have been flooding in. So thank you very much for everybody doing this. We probably won't get to everybody, but thank you for these questions. Probably the big question is, there are a lot of organizations sharing this kind of information, There's Mars, there's all the accident investigation branch reports, there's stuff coming out of the P&I clubs, out of the MOUs, but yet we're still having a lot of accidents. And you touched on that in your presentation, why, when there's all these sources of learning, why people are still making mistakes. And so feel free to answer that one, but I suppose the corollary is, how do we make those lessons better, or how do we get the learning process better through those lessons?
Right. Well, of course, accidents are still happening, but the trend from what I've been reading, and the statistical trends are on the lower. They're going down, and of course, reporting is more and more prevalent now. In the old days, and now 20, 30, 40 years ago, I mean, we only heard about the really bad accidents, you know, your Titanics or your you name it. I mean, those were the big ones, and everybody heard about that. But there was such a plethora of accidents underway, but small incidents and small accidents that, and they were just, you know, the culture was that they were not being reported. Now the culture is for reporting, and it's getting stronger and stronger. So as we go forward, the impression may be that accidents are still happening, and of course they are, and we're hearing about them, but I think that it's more a question of increased reporting and increased media coverage, and not just media, standard media, but I mean your within the company and within the country, even, you know, the accident reports of almost you know, of many countries are up on the web now in English. I mean, the Japanese reports, the Hong Kong reports, they're on the net in English. And so the culture of reporting has changed. And I think that, of course, the accidents are still happening, but at a reduced rate. And what we have to do, even, you know, is get those lessons learned out to more and more mariners. It should be part and parcel of the curriculum, for that matter, in officer training. I mean, in my day, 30, 40 years ago, we did not have any course that was entitled accidents, learning from accidents, lessons learned, or talking about safety culture, or what have you. So, you know, those things now should be discussed in the classroom for young officers coming out, and also on the ship during safety meetings, to inculcate the safety culture into the fiber, basically, of all the crew.
Thanks, Paul. One of the questions here, and I'll answer the first part of it, is how are the reports used? How do people use Mars reports? And certainly over the years, some of the best uses that I've heard of is that people use them for their onboard safety meetings, their weekly onboard safety meetings. They look at this and then they say, could this have happened to us? What can we learn as a bridge team? What can we learn as a ship's team from this report? And because all these reports are actual reports, they're absolutely spot on to learn from. The other thing is that we know that a lot of lecturers use case studies from the Mars reports to make their lessons new and fresh and, you know, precise for the industry. And anybody who wants to use material from the Mars reports is more than willing to do so. Just reference it as a Mars report, and that's fine. Use the graphics, use the test, but just get the lessons learned. Paul, do you want to add to that? I mean, you're at sea. How do your crews use Mars reports?
Well,
presumably they
do. Yeah, no, I mean, as inspiration for safety meetings, it's great. I mean, and you know, we're all mariners, and these are marine accidents, and so you will find amongst these Mars reports things that have happened probably on your vessel, and so you know, they're not made up, as you say. It's the real accidents, real incidents, and there's a darn good chance that similar instances have happened on your vessel. So, you know, use it as inspiration, use it as a model, and use it to reiterate what's happened on your vessel as well, and draw similarities and draw the differences out, and basically use the lessons learned and document that.
Thanks, Paul. We have a question here from Mano Heron, who says, what are the top 3 incident types for the last 3 years as recorded in the Mars? So let me just point out to people, there are a couple questions about statistics. Mars is not a statistical database. As I said, it's designed for mariners to share lessons with other mariners. There are statistical systems out there in the industry. I think each has their own point, but we have maintained over the years Mars to be readable, not data driven. So they're readable reports for lessons. But so your answer to this question, Paul, will be hunch based rather than numbers based. So off you go.
Absolutely. In fact, I won't even answer that question because you hit the nail on the head, David. I mean, Mars is not capturing all accidents and all incidents. It's a curated database. I'm the curator. I'm the editor of Mars, and I choose the accidents of all the accidents that I'm researching on the net, of all the accidents that I get submitted to me from companies. I'm curating those for interest, for readability, for lessons learned. What some accidents I just won't edit. I won't put them out there because there is either there's no lessons to be learned, or I judge that there are no lessons to be learned, or it's not readable. So you're exactly right, David. You cannot rely on Mars as a statistical resource. And you shouldn't, because if you do, you're making a mistake. You know, maybe there's a lot more groundings and fires in Mars than the actual weight of those accidents in the grand scheme of things. But they're only there because there were more lessons learned in them, or they were more readable, and that's why we put them out in Mars. But if you want to do a statistical analysis, then you'd have to go to a different database.
Thank you. This is a question from Kevin. Now, I know, Paul, that you're very concerned with pilot ladder safety, and so was Captain Vidal, who set up Mars originally. It was one of his big things. And, you know, for 30 years, we've been reporting pilot ladder issues and boarding issues. And it's just, sometimes you want to bang your head against the wall because of the bad designs that we continually see. But Kevin's question is, he says, I'm the co-founder of the Dangerous Pilot Ladder site. So everybody make a note of that. One problem that we have is that we are very good at identifying problems and offering solutions, but have problems getting organizations to hear our message. So certainly the Nautical Institute will do whatever we can, but Paul, what are your thoughts? Pilot ladders, we've forever a problem.
Well, of course, yeah, and but I mean, it's such a high risk endeavor. I mean, let's face it. The interaction between a small boat coming alongside a large vessel and dangling the large vessel dangling this little ladder over the side, and a human being or one or more scrambling up that ladder. I mean, that interaction is fraught with risks, with hazards, and if it's not dead on, if the procedure is not followed dead on, and the you know, how to put out the pilot ladder and all of the procedures that are well documented by IMO, if they're not followed religiously, well, there could be accidents happening, and you've got the swell, you've got the wind, you know. So my goodness, it is an interface, I guess we could call it an interface, where lots of things that could go wrong and sometimes do go wrong, unfortunately. Now, I don't know, you know, it's just the message just has to be kept pumping out that message about adhering to the proper pilot ladder procedure, and being super vigilant. I mean, never turning your back while a pilot is boarding or deboarding, and always keeping the eye on the pilot and the weather for that matter. But I mean, I don't have an answer for. I mean, I think many more smarter people than me have been thinking about this for many decades, and we don't seem to have come up with a better solution. I mean, now at least pilots are wearing their life jackets. I mean, they didn't used to in the old days. Even when I was an investigator, I did an investigation of a pilot falling overboard. He didn't have his life jacket on. He was one of maybe the 5% of pilots in the district I was investigating that didn't wear his life jacket. And I think now it's up to 100%. I assume, but in those days, and that was only about 15 years ago, there were still pilots that were not wearing their life jackets and were not required to. And you know, that's just a basic safety measure nowadays. I mean, you don't even ask that. But I mean, there's other hazards, of course, and not just falling in the water, but being crushed between the pilot boat and the vessel. You name it. I mean, it's just an act, an interface where lots of things can happen.
Thanks, Paul. And everybody who's listening to this, please do what you can to drive home the point on your ships, really how important it is to rig the ladder well and to make sure that they're well maintained. And anything that we can do at the Nautical Institute to help spread that message, Kevin, let me know, and we'll do whatever we can. So, Paul, here's another question from David, not me. It says, Paul, first, I'm a great fan of Mars. What is the ratio, and again, we're not a ratio organization, but what is the ratio between behavioral safety to process safety events?
Oh, well, thank you, David, for that question. Not quite sure I understand what you mean by process safety events versus. Could you repeat that, David?
Yeah. So, what is the ratio of behavioral safety to process safety events? Now, the way I'm reading this is behavioral safety being events caused by human behavior, as opposed to events caused by a poor procedure.
Right. Yeah, well, it's a great question. Again, we're not data driven in Mars, so I'm just going to answer this from the seat of my pants. My gut feeling is that, well, it's somewhere, I think, in the 50-50 range. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to grasp. Let's face it, you know, behavior at the end of the day, even if there's a process in place and good procedures, at the end of the day, it's the behavior of the person that counts. And are the procedures being followed? Are shortcuts being taken? Shortcuts have a tendency to creep in, and slowly but surely procedures are not followed religiously. There's reasons for shortcuts sometimes, and that's at that point maybe the procedure should be reviewed. But at the end of the day, the behavior of the crew is what counts. And if the procedures are not, and it's a question of leadership. I mean, are the leaders on the vessel ensuring that the procedures are being followed? Are they part and parcel of the shortcuts that are taking place? So, of course, I think, you know, at the end of the day, the behavior of the people of the crews are the outstanding feature. The process safety is the structure on which everything is hanging. But if people are not following the procedures, or if there's not a strong safety culture within the company and a strong reporting culture, then you're going to have those accidents, and it's going to be down to the behavior of the crew.
Thanks, Paul. This question is from Simon. Doesn't the evidence show that people become complacent about procedures and therefore revert back to easy but unsafe processes? So complacency.
Yeah. Well, the evidence, I'm not sure if the evidence shows that. We do see complacency creeping in accidents. Accident reports have uncovered complacency. Again, complacency is not the unsafe condition. Complacency is an unsafe act. So if there is complacency in place, if people are being complacent, then it's a question of leadership. Why has that complacency been allowed to continue? As soon as you have complacency in place, procedures are being short-circuited or what have you, on an ongoing basis, that is a leadership question. It's not a question of the complacent person. It's a question that the complacency has been allowed to continue. And so the unsafe condition is, in that case, would be a lack of good safety management and good safety leadership.
Thanks, Paul. I mean, it's interesting that there's a lot of discussion around complacency and whether complacency is actually a root cause or it goes deeper. A few years ago, when we were doing the alert series that many of you may be familiar with, we did a whole issue on what we call rogue behavior, and trying to understand why, when you have somebody who is competent with good procedures, why do they deviate? And Eric Holiday picked this up a little bit in his presentation last week on errors and violations. So if you're interested in rogue behavior, I wish I could tell you which issue it was in, but if you go to the alert website, which is he-alert.org, you'll find all the back issues there, and the one on rogue behavior is particularly good. So thanks, Paul. And very difficult when you're looking at incidents to actually understand why somebody did something that they did, because nobody sets out to make a mistake. You know, nobody says, you know, well, on very, very rare occasions does somebody say, oh, you know, I'm going to really mess this up. But they do. And so trying to understand the mental process of why somebody who is educated, who has the procedures, doesn't do them is fascinating.
It is, and rogue behavior is a fascinating topic. And there is, apart from the references that you just mentioned there, the alert series, there is a really good book out there, and of course I don't remember the title because I want to say it, but it's if anybody does a Google search on rogue behavior, it's basically a series, a compendium of rogue behaviors, mostly in the aviation industry. But it's you know, it's the same thing. If you read that book, it's extremely interesting. The documented rogue behavior that fighter pilots, for example, have been caught doing, airline pilots. So give that a Google search for people that want to go further into rogue behavior. It is a fascinating read.
Thanks, Paul. And again, you touch on how much we can learn from other industries, and you know, aviation's always a good one, but so is transport and chemicals, nuclear. You know, all of these industries are trying to solve, you know, the same sort of issues and having some very good success. So, Paul, this question comes from Leslie. It is, Paul, in your experience, what areas on board ship has the most accidents or the greatest risk? I suppose before you start to answer that, you need to look at the definition of risk and the likelihood versus the impact. But go ahead. Where is the most accidents and the greatest risk on board a ship?
Well, that again, it's a great question, Leslie. Thank you. And but again, it's kind of hard to point the finger at any one area. I mean, it's fairly evenly spread out in my gut feeling. You want to look at it maybe 33% on deck, 33% in the engine room, and 33% in the wheelhouse with ship maneuvers, groundings, collisions, etc. I mean, there's so much risk on the deck for the crew, for the seamen. Slippery decks, weather, you name it, anchoring, and any mooring, unmooring. Many accidents are happening in that domain. But having said that, then you've got the entire engine room department, and there's so much going on down there. So it would be, in my gut feeling, would be it's pretty well an even toss, about 30%, 35% on deck, the same tranche in the engine room, and then the remaining tranche in the wheelhouse for maneuvers and maneuvering and making way and what have you. So yeah, and of course there's a small percentage happening in the galley.
I was going to say, don't forget the galley. Having read your reports over the years, there's plenty of incidents in the galley. And of course, one of the things that we've been working on in the Nautical Institute is not just looking at human and procedural risk, but it's the risk of bad design. The number of times I've seen a galley where to go from the cooker to the work table, you have to carry hot boiling water across the deck when the ship, surprise, surprise, is moving.
Yeah.
We really have to think twice about some of our designs. And I mean, mariners are absolutely brilliant in making things work. But you give them a bad design, you force them into jury rig, and you have a dangerous situation. So the next question comes from Mohammed, and he says, do you think that after a BRM course became mandatory recently, are the accidents reduced? Are the accidents reducing from before? Now, before you crack in on that, Paul, I'd like to take a bite of the cherry here, because again, this is one of the passions of us in the Nautical Institute. And a couple of years ago, we started looking at this very seriously. And my colleague, who many of you may know, Captain Harry Gale, identified that you can do a BRM course and go on leave for a month, go back on your ship. But are you putting what you learned into practice? And this started us on the path of developing guidance for independent onboard assessment, particularly on the bridge. And we now, thank you, Paul, for mentioning the courses that we do. And we do a number of online courses, short courses, both in the classroom and now most recently online. But we do one specifically for onboard navigation assessment. And it's not an audit. An audit is what happens when you look at a snapshot of the system. It is an assessment. It is how people work. And by bringing somebody independent onto the bridge for a few days, while they're in pilotage, while they're in coastal waters, and watching what they do, and then providing feedback. And it's not a penalty feedback. It's a mentoring feedback. But sometimes people can't see their own actions. And it does take that little bit of a step back to do that. But Paul, what are your thoughts on BRM and even onboard resource management?
Right. Yeah. Well, of course, BRM. It hasn't been invented yesterday. It's been on the go now for what, about 20 years. In the marine field, it was invented for the aviation industry. About 10 years before that. But it's, you're totally right, David, in the sense that, and an excellent question, thank you, Mohammed. BRM, taking a course is one thing. Applying what you've learned in that course is another thing altogether. And you may be fresh out of the course and have all of these concepts in your mind fresh, and the first month is fine. But then slowly but surely you start reverting to your old way of doing things. And the thing about BRM is it can't be, it has to be practiced. It has to become part of the way you do business. And I guess two of the concepts that I really, really love in BRM are the challenge concept. That is, if you are part of the bridge team and you're not sure of something, to be able to challenge that decision in a diplomatic way, of course, by questioning, what's happening, or why are we going that way? What, isn't it starboard instead of port, sir? But also thinking out loud when you're going to give a helm command to explain why you're doing it. Let's say for example, for a pilot, instead of just giving starboard 10, okay, where he's going to want to think out loud and say, okay, we're coming up to a course change. We're going to be going to starboard 10 in the next, in about 10 seconds coming up, and that gives a chance for the rest of the bridge team to chirp in, to say, to make sure that they're all in the same mindset and they're all singing from the same song sheet, so to speak. So yeah, you've got to practice what you preach. You've got to inculcate the lessons of BRM and make it part of your everyday process. And that's, I think, the hard part is just changing the way you do business.
Thanks, Paul. Another question here by Kirill, and you'll like this one. How do you motivate people to report near misses as much as possible? Now, while you're thinking about that, I'll just say that in 20 years that I've been following Mars reports, I've seen a huge change in the type of reports. 20 years ago, most of the reports were, you should have seen what that idiot did. And it was observational, often to do with call regs. But now, Paul, let me know if this is your feeling as well. Since the ISM code has come in, a lot of the reports that we're getting are really well thought about. They're not, look what that idiot did. They're saying, this is the incident. This is what happened. Here are the facts. And what I really like is they said, this is what went right. Then this is what went wrong. And now these are the lessons learned. And I think that process of thinking about it that's come with the ISM code and with quality management has generally improved the quality of the reports. But again, this one has to do with how do you motivate people to report more.
Right. And well, yeah, I totally agree with what you just said, David. We've come a long way in the last 20 years, 30 years. We've come a long way in accident reporting, incident reporting, and also of not pointing the finger. I mean, people are becoming more and more attuned to the fact that it's not a question of pointing the finger. It's a matter of, and finding a guilty party. It's a matter of learning the lessons and making sure it doesn't happen again. So it doesn't matter who it happened to. It's not necessarily their fault. But motivating, I mean, that's a great question, and something that I think all ship leaders have to ask themselves. How am I going to motivate my crew to report everything, even the slip that didn't have any consequences? The cook slipped on the deck in his galley and almost dropped the hot water, but he didn't. But you want to hear about that. And the only way you're going to get crew to report everything is if your safety leadership as a ship leader is strong. If you, as a ship's leader, are holding regular meetings, and if you are telling your crew, we are not pointing the finger. You will not be pursued as an unsafe employee. We need to hear the reports, and it's all in the attitude of the leadership. So motivating them is a matter of a communication, of having open communication, having lots of safety meetings, of discussing the close calls and the accidents in a non-accusatory manner, and that will pave the way for even more reports and motivate your crew. And there are, you know, motivate. You can try to introduce within the process congratulatory methods and certificates and what have you for excellent reporting.
Thanks, Paul. With an eye on the time, I did promise that we would try to keep this to about an hour, and we're at about an hour now. So there are many questions here that we won't get to all of them. We'll try to deal with some of them afterwards. But thank you for all the questions. It's been a really good debate. Paul, thank you so much for your time. I would just like to shamelessly reiterate how important sponsorship is through the affiliate partnership scheme. And it is that there are a couple different packages you can do, but it's as little as 500, and you support the work that Paul's doing, which takes effort, it takes intelligence, but we're really trying to get the lessons learned out there so that people don't make these mistakes. And, you know, Paul and I, you know, having gone through these reports, we were just talking before the webinar on how desperate some of these incidents are, and you just read them and think, oh no, but they do happen, and my gosh, it's much better to learn from somebody else's near miss than to have one yourself. So do this, read all the reports you can for education. So just before we sign off here, one of the questions is how many people have been involved in this, and it's about 300. So thank you all. And I suspect that we've probably had close to 100 questions, if not more. So thank you for that. As I said, there will be a little quiz at the end. Please let us know what you thought and what we can do better. What other subjects you'd like to hear about, because we have a very broad scope in the Nautical Institute. There will be a CPD or attendance certificate coming out, and a recording of this webinar will be put up on our YouTube channel probably by tomorrow. Again, it's go to YouTube, click search Nautical Institute, and we have a channel that will have this webinars and quite a few others. So with that, I wish you all goodbye. Thank you again for your support of the Nautical Institute, and stay safe. So I'm going to log out. Paul, just for the software, if you could log off, and then I'll close the meeting. So thank you all very much.
Bye-bye.